She's an author, a lecturer, an adjunct professor. I don't know what that is. Maybe that's part of your talk. But so we're really privileged to have Cara sharing with us today. Why don't you welcome her?
Thanks a lot, Andrew. And I do have to start by admitting I'm not actually a doctor. I never got my doctorate. I am an adjunct professor, which is, You're a doctor. Yeah. Thank you. I always wanted to be a doctor because my last name is Martin, so I would have been Doc Martin. I mean, how cool is that? I almost wore them tonight too. The thing I want to talk about is what is God's imagination for our work, and I wonder if you've thought about that. If that sounds like something that makes sense to you, connecting God with the word work, is that something that you've thought about a lot? Is that something you've read about or you've heard about? I wonder if that's just a surprising thing to think about. What could God's imagination be for your work, for our work? And I wanted to go back and start the story from when I, as a TV journo, walked into a TV studio for the first time. I was 22 years old. I was thinking about that, and I was thinking that line, a TV journo walked into the studio, and I was thinking it's like the start of a joke, isn't it? It's like, what's going to happen from here? And it reminds me of one of my favourite little jokes lately has been a pastor, a priest, and a rabbit walked into the bar. And then the rabbit said, "I think this is a typo." So, cool. As a TV journo, I thought I'd thought it all through. I'd actually been to uni at University of Technology, Sydney. I'd done a Bachelor of Arts in Communications there, and that was a hard uni to be a Christian at in many ways. In fact, the academic dean at that uni had called me into his office one time, and he said, "I think that you might be a Christian." And I said, "Oh, how'd you work that out?" And he said, "Oh, just from some of your writing." He said, "I picked up on it." And he said, "I've got you here pastorally." And I thought, "Oh, this is really nice." And he said, "To tell you that by the end of the degree, you either won't be a Christian or you will have left." And I was like, wow, there's a challenge. And I said, "Why is that?" And he said, "Well, it's just Christianity and this course just don't go together." He said, "You're going to find it really tough." So I had, through uni, done the hard work. I managed to find a couple of other Christians who were hiding out in this comms course, and we got together and we met and we talked through the stuff. The church was an easy target for some of the stuff that they were talking about. We sort of worked through that. We got to the point where we really thought that we had a really good idea of what God's imagination for our work was. And then I walked into the TV studio. And it was a really weird experience. It was really strange. I thought I was so prepared. But the first thing that hit me was I really was just a nice Christian girl. Because I walked into that studio and, there were people there. There was a lot of swearing and stuff going on. And I thought, actually, yeah, I have grown up in a pretty protected sort of way. But it wasn't just that. It was also the fact that on the average day, I had to make all these ethical decisions so quickly. People were asking us to do certain things as journos, and I'd have to work out, okay, is this the right thing to do? What does my face say about this? I feel a little bit uncomfortable about some of these things. How do I work out what I do here? And then there was the stress, the pressure of it, trying to come up with stories every day, really fast-paced work environment happening. And to cope with that stress, the way people cope with it, a few different ways they cope with it. One of the ways they coped with it was alcohol. At the end of the day, when we'd finally put that news bulletin to air, it was very typical to settle down and just have a few drinks. So it wasn't sometimes just a few drinks either. That was just part of the lifestyle that was there. I wondered, what do I do about this? How do I be a Christian in this place? It feels like it's a tough place. So I went to talk to my minister, and he actually wasn't much help. He was more interested in working out how we could get the church on TV rather than how to help me live through this job every day. And in those days, there weren't many books around. There weren't podcasts I could listen to. There weren't many ways that I could actually get some more information on this. So what I did was I managed to find another journo who worked in newspapers, another journo who worked in radio, who were Christians, and we used to get together and just meet. And we'd sort of talk with each other and just try and figure out, okay, how would you deal with this situation? How are you going? Are you still sort of keeping true to your faith in this? We'd just encourage each other. We called our group Scoop for Christ, which is a terrible name. It's just horrible. The only one I think I've heard that is worse, I met a bunch of guys who were doing BJJ down in Melbourne, and they called themselves Grapplers for Christ. And I thought that's almost as good as Scoop for Christ. Anyway, so we met with each other. We encouraged each other. And so what I'm going to share today is the sort of stuff that I wish I'd known then that would have given me some framing for how do I approach work and how do I think about it from a Christian perspective, from a biblical perspective. So here are the ideas. Yes. First idea is that work is good. This is the way work was. One of the things that we often forget is work was there before the fall. It was actually there and present and a good thing. In fact, God works. We don't often think about that. You know, there he is creating the world and he's just speaking things into being. It seems so easy for God. It's very different to the way that we see our work. But God is working. And we're made in the image of a God who works, which means that work is intrinsic to what it means to be a human and what it means to be in relationship with God. So work is there. Work is a good thing. In fact, the very first command that God gives us is to work, to steward his good creation. How do we steward creation? We do it through our work. We could go around and talk about everybody's job here, and we could think about the ways that it actually is stewarding creation. So God works and we work. In Genesis 2:5, God, it's a retelling of Genesis 1, slightly different angle, and God has created this garden, and then he comments, but there was no one to work in the garden. And then he creates the human being, and then he takes the human being and puts him in the garden to work the earth and to keep the garden. So in many ways, we were created to work. It might sound a little bit scary. But that's what we read right from the beginning. We were created to work the earth, to keep the garden, the good creation that God has, and to work with God. I love that picture in Genesis chapter 2, verses 18 to 20, where it's talking about God and human beings hanging out together. And God decides to bring all the animals before the human being to see what the human being is going to name them. And it's such a beautiful image. I don't know if you can just imagine that there is God, there is the human being, and there's the animal, and God's saying, so, what do you reckon? Big nose, tusk, what are you going to call it? And that naming role is actually a really significant role. It's a really important role. It's calling forth the essence of what the creature is. It's a great kindness that God asked the human being to be involved in that work. But it's a beautiful picture of what work was meant to be. We were meant to be working with God, closely with God. So work is a good thing. It's right there at the beginning of the Bible. Work is good. That lasts for how long? 2 chapters. 2 chapters in the Bible. That's how long it lasts. Genesis 3, something goes wrong. Working becomes bad. The man and the woman decide that they want to do things a bit separately from God, and there are consequences for that. For many of us, and even I think generally for society, this is where our understanding of work begins, that work is bad, because this is the way we experience it. One of the things I find interesting is it's very hard to talk about sin with other people unless you talk about work. Everyone knows about sin at work. Everyone knows that something is broken, that people are broken, that we struggle to work together. And that is what happens. That's the experience that we have. And sometimes we say things like, work is a curse. Have you heard that expression? You might have even used that expression. But it's not work that is a curse. Work is still a good thing. If you read the text really carefully in Genesis 3, it's the ground that is cursed, not work itself. And so it's not work that is a curse, it's the process of working that is cursed. That's the way we experience work. It's the process that is actually a struggle. There are thorns and thistles it talks about in the passage that follows. Thorns and thistles, I call it IT. Don't know what you call it. For the IT workers, we're very grateful for you. Maybe you call users your thorns and thistles. But yeah, work is not going to be as productive as we like it to be. Just as, there's a garden, and just imagine if there were no thorns and thistles and you could just grow anything you like. But no, there are things that come up that actually impact on the productivity of our work. And the reality is that our work is painful toil. The Hebrew there is ishabon. It feels like painful, it feels like toil, just the phrasing of it. And so we have to work by the sweat of our brow. Things are much harder than they needed to be. And that's our experience of work generally, isn't it? But that's not the end of the story with work, because work can be redeemed. And I think it can be redeemed in many different ways. I think workplaces can be redeemed. I think work colleagues can be redeemed, and we can experience this. And this is actually the responsibility that we have as Christians in the workplace. It's an incredible opportunity. I know that sometimes when you're in the workplace, like when I first walked into that TV studio, all you're thinking about is survival. Can I survive here as a Christian? But I wish I had thought about it differently. Here is an amazing opportunity to be God's person in this place. Because the reality is that what Jesus came to do was to reconcile all things to himself. We just heard it just a few moments ago from Andrew. This was Jesus' role, to reconcile. But if you look up a passage like Colossians 1:15-20, if you read through that passage, you will see that it's not just reconcile our souls so that we can go to heaven when we die. In that passage, it talks about reconciling all things in heaven and on earth, all things in heaven and on earth, all things in heaven and on earth. It actually repeats it 3 times. All things are to be reconciled through blood. So we are called to be part of that reconciliation process, reconciling things in heaven and on earth. How can we do that? How can we do that in the place where God has placed us? The context of work, the context of neighborhood, they're places where we can be part of God's reconciling mission through Jesus. Another way to think about it is to think about Jesus' mission. If you look at this picture, it might make you think of a certain moment when Jesus was on earth. That moment, it's described in Luke 4, that moment when he was in Nazareth and he was called up in the synagogue to read the scroll. So in the synagogues, they would have a pattern of worship, and there'd be someone from the community that would be invited forward to do the reading of the day. And this particular day, Jesus is invited up, and he unfurls the scroll, and he reads from Isaiah 61. He says, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, and he has anointed me to preach good news to the poor." And then it goes on to say, to open the eyes of the blind, heal the blind, and also to set the oppressed free. And then he says, "These words are fulfilled in your hearing." He sits down and everything pandemonium breaks out. But that idea of his mission. Now again, sometimes when we read that as, well, that's about Jesus healing us in terms of sin, isn't it? So what he's doing now, preaching good news to the poor, that's about preaching good news to the poor in spirit. What he's doing in terms of opening the eyes of blind, that's opening the eyes of those who are blind to their sin. What he's doing in setting the oppressed free, that's about setting those who are oppressed by sin free. And I think that's true. That's absolutely true. We see Jesus actually fulfilling all of that. But what does he do from this point? He also actually does those things. He goes to the poor and he offers them good news for them about the way that God sees them, the way that God has a bias to the poor and the vulnerable. He does actually physically heal the eyes of the blind and the lame and the deaf. He does actually go and set people who are oppressed free. Some of those who experienced depression were people like children, and he invites the children in. Were women, and he spends an inordinate amount of time hanging out with women. And then those who are oppressed by social circumstances and social status, he sets them free. So there's an element to which we, through our work, might have the opportunity to do that. How can we open the eyes to the blind through our teaching work? How can we set the oppressed free, those who are oppressed in terms of whatever struggles they have, or even those who are oppressed in the workplace or vulnerable in the workplace? How can we get alongside them and help them? How can we enable people to see what they do in new ways and fresh ways? So, there is great possibility for our work, and I think that part of what we want to do today is explore what that could be, what that could look like. So here are some of the ways that we can be part of this mission in terms of redeeming our work. And this might give you some ideas for when we break up into groups a little bit later. So Jesus came to reconcile all things in heaven and on earth. We are part of that reconciling mission. Jesus is the one who redeems. I want to just sort of reinforce that. It's not like we have the power to redeem, but we can actually be part of the process of that in the work that we do. Our work is part of these acts of reconciliation, and our work is also helping to fulfill Jesus's ongoing mission. Got to be creative sometimes, but maybe you can think of ways that you can be part of those things that Jesus talked about in terms of his mission on earth. Our work gives people a taste of the kingdom. Wouldn't that be a beautiful thing? If you could just in your workplace think of a way that you can give people a taste of the kingdom, what it's like, that might be attractive to them. Our work should be done using Jesus' words that he taught us in his prayer. God's will should be done on earth as it is in heaven. I wonder how we can do that in our work, help people to see what heavenly work was like. Our work can reveal God. When God created everything, it actually has his nature built into creation. There are things there that we can say, this is God. They draw us to him. Our work can actually reveal what it means to be a Christian as well, in subtle and sometimes more obvious ways. How can we be part of that? In our work, we can incarnate Jesus. When Jesus came to earth, he was the one who showed us who God was and what God was like. How can we, by the way we treat other people, by the way we work, how can we actually incarnate Jesus? I wonder how we can do that. I heard of a story the other day where there was a tradie who was out and he was doing some work, and he was drilling into a cupboard in someone's kitchen. And on 3 of the sides, he drilled away and it was all fine. On the other side, he was on the 18th hole that he was drilling, and he was leaning down doing the last hole, and he looked through and there was light coming through, and he thought, that's not a good sign. And he had actually drilled right through the cupboard to the outside. It was much thinner than he had expected it to be. And he went around to the other side, and there it is. He's in this beautiful kitchen, this house in Mossman, and he's just put 18 holes into their kitchen. And he's just like, oh my gosh. He went up to the owner and he said, I am so sorry. I have completely stuffed this. I have really stuffed this up. I'm really sorry about this. I will do what I need to do it right. And the owner said, oh, that's okay. I have confidence in you that you'll do it right. What are you going to do? And this person explained, well, he had a friend who worked in cabinetry, and he'd work it out. And he said, I'll let you know exactly what I'm going to do, when I'm going to do it, and I'll put this right. The next day, he sent off the invoice because he was like, he didn't feel good about it, but he had to invoice for the work that he had done that had worked. And he got this amazing email from the owner. The owner said, you know what? He said, we were so impressed with how you owned up to your mistake. He said, we realized that you felt so bad about what you did. He said, that really made a difference to us. He said, we are so used to people doing stuff and then trying to cover it up or blame other people. He said, we were really impressed with how you owned up to that. They said, it's not so much making mistakes, like everyone makes mistakes. He said, it's actually how we deal with the mistakes we make and how we react to it. He said, that's what makes the difference with people. He said, we are really impressed with your professional attitude. We know you're going to fix this. And he said, we just wanted to reassure you that we will use your services again because we trust you. What an amazing outcome from someone who had stuffed up on the job. This guy was a Christian, and he thought that making a mistake was the worst thing he could do as a Christian. But actually, it turned out to open up a conversation about mistakes and forgiveness that he never thought he'd have the opportunity to have. Our work is a way of expressing God's love and the difference that God makes. I love this quote from N.T. Wright in Surprised by Hope. It gives us hope for our work. What do you do with your body in the present matters, because God has a great future in store for it. What you do in the present by painting, preaching, digging wells, campaigning for justice, praying, teaching, building hospitals, writing poems, caring for the needy, loving your neighbour as yourself, all those things. I wonder if there's something that resonates with you in that list. Will last into God's future. These activities are not simply ways of making the present life a little less beastly. I love that expression. It's so English, isn't it? A little less beastly, a little more bearable, until the day when we leave it behind altogether. They are part of what we may call building for God's kingdom. I wonder if you've ever thought of your work like that it's actually echoing forward into the future. Your work can be a little part of building for God's kingdom. I wonder if you have ever thought of that. So what we're going to do today is open up an opportunity for you to imagine that, to try and think with God. What could he do with your work? What could he do with it in a way that would just open up new possibilities that could build for God's kingdom? And the thing I love about what we're doing today is that we're not doing it on our own. So much of what we do feels very individual, but we're going to collaborate on that. You'll get to sit in groups with other people and talk about this and hopefully form connections and think about this in a different way. And it's a beautiful vision that Andrew's had for this. It's so important to do this. A few years ago, I was invited by a group of people to go to Manila to be part of a forum. We had 1,000 people actually in the room from all over the world, and we were talking about work in really helpful, fruitful, beautiful ways. And the way that the guy who started off that conference started, he said, during these next few days, he said, you're going to meet someone and you're going to have a conversation. He said, we don't know what that is now. He said, but I am sure you will meet someone. I'm sure you will have a conversation. I'm sure you'll hear something, and it will change the direction of what you do as a result. And at the time, I was sitting there and I was thinking, oh yeah, sure. Because I'm slightly cynical. I don't know if that's an Australian thing. I was thinking, yeah, maybe, maybe not. Well, I ended up meeting, I think, about 5 people there who have impacted on me. I had 5 different sorts of conversations. And as I was thinking about this talk and working through it and practicing it and praying about it during the week, I just had a sense that God was saying, that's what today is going to be like as well. It's going to be like that for you. There'll be a moment tonight, there'll be a conversation, there'll be something you'll hear, and God is going to speak to you deeply about that. And that happens because we've got an intention today to collaborate, to think about how can we do this together? How can we think about this together? How can we encourage each other together? How can we think about this in different ways? So I'm excited for what's going to happen. And I want you to reassure me that that even if you were a little bit cynical, I want to hear by the end of the night that, yeah, something happened. I want to hear about that, and I've been praying into that and praying for that, and I'm sure that's going to happen. And I've just had a conversation just before we were starting even that has made me think about something differently, so it will happen for you. Here are some other resources that I have if you're interested in following up, some books I've written and a podcast, Worship on the Way to Work. But there are other resources that are going to be talked about as well. Make use of these. Don't be like me, walking into that TV studio where I just had no idea how I was going to go forward, no idea where I was going to get access to resources. Make use of resources that are around, and not just mine. There's so many things now. There are thousands of books and opportunities out there to find out more and do more. And God has an amazing imagination for your work and what you can do in the workplace. Thanks.